Hello, welcome to the March update for MLFX. This one's coming a little bit later. In fact, 20th of April. Oh no. We've been very busy with development. The plan has been evolving rapidly over the last sort of month and a half as we figure out how we're going to get a product to market quickly that is going to be well received and popular, right? We want something that people need. So after doing a lot of research and looking into the potential candidates or potential areas we could go into, we decided upon using a pattern recognition system as well as programming popular strategies. So think of going through YouTube, going through Google and looking at the top 20 or so strategies, looking at strategies that people are readily using in terms of influencers, and there's a lot of eyeballs on these things. So by going in and by manually programming our agents, we can set them up to use these strategies and then compare them against each other. Or they can fight to the death and the best will survive, but we can rank them based on which are the most profitable, and people can choose to monitor those strategies, those patterns such as head and shoulders, using real-time charts, which is another good feature that we're going to add. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because in fact in March we hadn't really decided that this is the way we were going. So there was a lot of work going on in March. And for the sake of, being consistent as to where our head was at during the month, I haven't updated it with my thoughts, even though we are later on in April. I wrote most of this sort of at the beginning of April and the end of March. And I'm just now getting around to recording the video and putting it all together. So to begin with, just going to brush over a lot of stuff here. If you haven't read Clean Code Collection by Robert C. Martin and you are a programmer or you are an aspiring programmer, maybe even just managing programmers, I highly recommend that book. There's actually two of them in there, and it's a bit of a read. It's a bit of a, there's a lot to go through. There's a lot to dissect and analyze, but there is a lot of valuable information in there. And if you don't want to actually read the book, you can go to I think there's a couple of GitHub pages, and there's people who have taken the best bits from the book and boiled it down into a short TLDR sort of section where you can go and get the gist of what the book's about. But it's just about keeping your code clean. It's about making everything makes sense, right? Code should make sense. You should be able to read it and be like, oh, yep, that is what it makes sense. It does what it sounds like. It does what it reads. And you're not left guessing about what certain things do, trying to decipher other people's code, because there's nothing worse than having someone who's left the team leave a mess that someone else has to come in and try to decipher, right? It's just a waste of time for everybody involved. That being said, let's get on to the lightning round. So in March, we set up a Vortex server, which allows us to create static test servers for our domains, or static test server domains, so that we can then link back to them in our documentation and not have to worry about links being broken every time we're updating the server, etc., etc. This also means that we can run multiple instances now of the server. Now that we have multi-threading, which is one thing that we did in March, we can have multiple instances of the algorithm running in parallel, which means that we can test twice as much as we previously were, which is awesome, right? That's awesome. And we can compare these two versions, alternate versions of the algorithm against each other and see which one is performing the best. We also in March incorporated our company, so we've chosen MLTech Ltd as our company. So Ltd is limited, so it's just MLTech, which is based out of New Zealand. It's just another step in the right direction. I don't know why that's all bold. I need to unbold that. That is just wreaking havoc on my OCD, wreaking havoc. We also decided on the dashboard, so we decided on the Vuexi dashboard. It's a really beautiful dashboard. In fact, I'll jump over to it now, and we can have a look at it. Whoops. But it's a really nice dashboard. They have multiple different versions of it. We're just going with a pure Vue.js. This is what it looks like. There's all these different components, ready-made, uses Bootstrap Vue, which is, Bootstrap's one of the more popular things out there, and Vue is the JavaScript framework, which is gaining in popularity, and I believe is going to overtake the prominent React framework, because React is the industry standard, right? But Vue is the developer choice, and the developers are speaking, and Vue seems to be rising to the top in terms of the number of stars on GitHub. They've recently outperformed React. There's more than React. Yes, React might still be, is definitely still being used on more project at the moment, but I believe Vue will overtake them in the not too distant future. It's just so much better. There's so much more community support, and it's a good system overall. So we've chosen to go with Vue. Really nice, heaps of different components. I won't go through all of them, but there's lots of different things that we're going to utilize here. We'll only copy over what we need, and we'll just start with a boilerplate template based off of this, and go from there. Back to the article. So we decided that was the way to go. Christian started work on that, but we've actually recently hired another developer. In fact, yesterday I hired another developer to join the team, and he's going to be focusing mainly on creating that dashboard and getting it up to the standard that we need. Armory added a common Lisp linter, which is really just a way of making sure the code quality is high, debugging, stuff like that, making sure it's all good. More bold. Man, this is annoying. Some database speed improvements were made. So it was taking forever for us to load the the analysis page. We changed to a system where we are having many more times signals created. In fact, it's sometimes up to 80,000 signals per week, which is huge. Considering previously we were getting, on a good week, 700, right? So that's over 80 times more signals. In fact, it's probably more like 100 times more signals in a week. And with that, we had some issues. It's good because we got to stress test the system, but it wound up taking forever and the system was timing out. So he's worked a bit of magic and got things working faster, cracked the whip. It's all good to go now. Same issue with the validator. It was trying to validate thousands and thousands more signals than previously, and we had implemented a system to actually slow it down so we didn't get banned from Oanda's API, because we were having to call Oanda's API to get updated rates so we could then revalidate or validate using the most recent data. But we decided to use a batching system, so instead of individually doing this, we would switch to batching per pairing, which allowed us to sort of mitigate that issue. And now it's more than fast enough to validate all of the trades that are getting created, plus more, which is great to see. So I alluded to it just before, but the first sort of product that we were working on is general nested signals, which is an adaptation of what we were doing previously, which was just creating sort of selective signals, I'll call them. And selective signals were the most activated agent every time that the market was tested. So for each pairing, you would return the most activated agent, and that agent would create a signal based on what it believed was happening. Now, that's not the best for multiple reasons. I'm not going to go too much into it, but the main one is we were assuming that the most activated agent was the best agent for that situation. And theoretically, that should be correct, but that is also going on the assumption that we have the system configured correct, which is not something good to assume. We should always start wide and then get narrow with our assumptions, if at all possible. So that's what we're doing now. We're going a bit wider, and instead of just returning one signal, we in fact return up to 20 signals per pairing every time the market is tested, which is now every 15 minutes. So if you do the math there, we've got 9 pairings, a potential of 20 signals per pairing. What does that become? 9 times 20, and we're looking at 180 potential signals every 15 minutes, which is how often we test. So that's a lot of signals. And the idea here is that, as I said, we've got that wider net. We can then look at some of the signals in here and see, okay, this one actually has been performing historically much better than the most activated signal, which is the parent signal here. So these nested ones are slightly less activated, although on this image they're not, but we've updated it since then. So the most activated is the parent, and then it would chronologically show, or it would show an order from most activated to least activated, and we could see how well those agents have been performing over time. And initially it was quite eye-opening because we've sort of identified that there might be a possible flaw in the system where certain agents are getting overconfident or they're over-activating, and they're basically just trying to trade all the time, which means they must have lucked out during training to actually get into the agent pool. So there's some things that still need addressing there, but we're making good progress. We've learned a lot based off this already. It's going to change dramatically how it looks, but the concept of what we're doing here is going to stay the same once we sort of transfer this over into the app. The next thing we worked on was multi-threading, and multi-what? So this may go over a lot of your heads, but multi-threading just allows the processors within the CPU, so the cores within the CPU, which is your processor and your computer, to work on multiple things at the same time, or multiple tasks. Commonly within programming and within applications, things sort of happen in a cascading system where it's like a waterfall. They complete one task, then they move on to the next task. They complete that task, they move on to the next. And it's very linear, right? It has to do one thing, then do the next, then do the next. But you're not maximizing your hardware. You're not maximizing the technology that you have available in that situation. And in some instances, not in all, but in our case, it makes sense to do multi-threading and to have multiple things happening in parallel. So by enabling multi-threading, we can now do things such as having all of our agents, all of our pairings rather, training and optimizing in parallel. So instead of us going through and cycling through all of the pairings, we can now test all of the markets at the same time, return signals for all of them at the same time, which is good for congruency. It's just makes it a much better user experience because we know every 15 minutes more signals are coming, and every 15 minutes we're getting an updated prediction as to what's going on. Also, by doing that, it sort of increases the potential for performance by 8 times, because what we can do is once we upgrade the servers, we can assign a single core to each of those pairings, and they can just continuously iterate, and we can hopefully arrive to a better solution a lot quicker, or a better model a lot quicker. We can also do many other things like separate the validator system from the optimization process and separate all the different components out to have their own thread and their own, do it autonomously on their own, and they're not having to wait for the resources to become available to do it. Finally, there's also the ability now to, as I sort of said earlier at the beginning of this video, we can run multiple instances of the algorithm in parallel, so that allows us to increase the amount of things that we test by a factor of 2, because we've just doubled that instantly. But we could theoretically just create as many of these instances as we want. So we could have 10 versions of the algorithm running if we wanted, and they could all be testing different things. We could have a centralized dashboard where all of the metrics are gathered, and we can easily sift through those different versions of the algorithm, compare which are the better ones, which are the worst ones, take the best, add those features into the main branch, and then that would be our live version that we would push live with the best updates. Obviously, we need more manpower to do that, but that's sort of where we could go with this, which is quite exciting. Already talked about switching to the 15-minute time frame, so I'm not going to go over that. Another thing that was done is called fractional differentiation, which I know makes the head hurt a little bit when you say it and think about it. What it can be boiled down to is agents now, through the use of fractional differentiation, have what's called an extended memory or a long-range dependency or long memory, which means that they're able to remember a lot more of what happened in the past. And what this means for us is that those agents will remember how they traded at particular support and resistance levels, how the market performed at those levels, and like the volatility. And also they can remember if there was other agents, like this is eventually, but if there was other agents that did certain things, as you'll see in this video, if you watch this video, they will remember how to interact with those agents in the best way, right? So maybe there's a couple of agents that if they don't trade, or if they do trade, that is an indicator to either not trade in the market or to trade for this specific agent that I'm using as a test case here. So it might look at these other agents and think, okay, I pair up really well with them, and they, you know, when they decide to do something, generally I should do the opposite, or generally I should be very cautious. But it's things like that that this fractional differentiation allow, which is really exciting. It's one of the fundamental things that you need to do when it comes to creating a financial model or a financial prediction algorithm. And it's well documented that this is a great thing that we need to do, so it's good to just have it integrated into the system. Armory talked a bit about it here. I'm not going to go over it. You can read that if you want to. And we also linked to a helpful article in a GitHub repo, which is what we modeled our implementation off. So you can check those out if you want to. In March, I was mainly focusing on website improvements. So yeah, I don't really rate myself as a designer, but I'm getting better. So yeah, we'll see. I don't really rate myself as a writer, as you can see here either. So I said, you might be able to design okay, but you suck at writing. So get to the point, peasant. And found this pretty comical image here that I thought I'd chuck in for you guys. So really what was done is just a bit of a redesign. I shifted the theme to mainly a dark theme, which I think just looks a bit cleaner. I also added a couple of pages. One's a roadmap, one's for features, and gave the homepage a bit of a revamp. Although none of these are 100% completed as of yet, the majority of the work is done. All I need to do now is just update some of the copy and the imagery, but to do that, I'm sort of waiting on the app to be completed, which is probably going to be a couple of months away. So I'm just going to chip at this for the next couple of months. If anyone visits the website in the meantime, it's going to be a little bit all over the show and not going to look great, but hopefully they give us a chance and they come back in a few months and check it out once it's actually finished. And it should be really, really nice then. Beta results for the month, there wasn't any. We are putting that on hold for now because we're doing a lot of work and a lot of changes, and it's just we're unable to sort of maintain checking those results, especially with 80,000 signals for me to check. It's just unrealistic to manually do it. So until we can get an automated system in place, that's going to be on hold. Automated systems is one of the first things we're implementing into this new app, so that should be only a couple of months away, which is good. A couple of issues here, I won't go into them, they're just basic bug fixes, but what are we focusing on in the not too distant future, and what are we already almost done with? So adding additional input functions is something that's been on the list for a little while. It needs to be done. We slowly add to it, but there is priorities for Armory at the moment, and that is not the top of the pile. Pattern recognition and strategies is something that is top of the pile. He needs to do a few things to do with creating an API for automating or for manual rather programming of the agents. So that's pretty high up the priority list. Same with Auth0 user authentication. Christian has almost finished doing that. We just need to work on some basic things to allow users to update their information in our app and then send it to Auth0, which is the service we use to store our membership or our member data, user data. Same with integrating Stripe payments. A lot of the work is done, but we just need to sort of get over that final hurdle. That'll be another thing Christian will probably take care of. The API as well has been done. It's just in the final stages of testing and documentation, and this is the main API to integrate, to allow our app to talk to our backend server, to receive and update any of our data to do with the algorithm in terms of the agents, the signals, that kind of stuff. And finally, last thing on the list that we're focusing on, although there is many other, you would hate to see our Trello board at the moment, but the last thing on this list is charting. So we're going to add some basic charts into our app. You know, I like pretty charts. I like looking at data, and charts are just a better way to boil everything down into the main things that you need to be focusing your attention on. So that's us for this month. That's us for the month of March, although, as I said, talking about it in April. Lots of work has been done on top of what I've just discussed. If you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe and give it a like if you haven't to either of those already. We are getting to the business end of this application of MLFX. It's been ongoing for a long time now, but we're sort of at the stage where we finally figured out everything that needs to be done. We've finally figured out sort of the vision or how we're going to progress forward, and moving towards a product that we can put a time frame on, we can put a deadline on, and know with certainty that we'll be able to achieve it within that time frame. So that was a very important lesson for us, is that you can't work on a project, or you can't work on a product if you need to turn it into a product that you're getting revenue from. You can't work on something that you're uncertain of when it'll be completed and have that as your sole breadwinner, right? The sole responsibility for revenue generation, for getting customers and things, because you never know when that might happen. Yes, you might have a good idea, but things always crop up. There's always roadblocks. So it's much better to get something to market that is definite, right? It's definitely achievable. It's definitely a viable product. There is demand for it. There is already customers using other people's products that are similar, etc., etc. So that's a very valuable lesson to anyone who's watching this that might be thinking about starting a business or anything. That is a very valuable lesson that you should take away from our mishaps and our learning. Righty ho, I'm going to cut the video there. I will see you in next month's video, which is probably only going to be 2 weeks away or so. But until then, if you have any questions or anything, you can find us in our Telegram group, and we're always happy to answer any questions, queries, or listen to any feedback that you have about the system in general.